divided England into 4 quarters, then this story would happen in the southwesterlymost quarter. It is just after midsummer, and Mr. Thomas, a don in one of the Cambridge colleges, is off to visit his new friend, the squire. Now, he had met Squire Ridgely as a committee in town, and they had hit it off, and the squire had invited him to stay after the rigours of May week were over. And so at last Mr. Thomas was off, and the train was rattling through the most glorious countryside he had ever seen. All hill and copse, hedgerow and little river. The distant mountains looming on the edge of imagination. And as he rode, he smiled. And he had a map out in front of him, and he was examining closely the road. Perhaps he was a motorist, but then why was he taking the train? When he arrived at the station, the porter helped him with his luggage, but also pulled down a bicycle. For this was Mr. Thomas's pride and joy, and he got it out like a mother duck, and put it on the road, and spun the wheels round. Just then, a horse and chaise drove up. "Are you Mr. Thomas?" they called. And Mr. Thomas replied, "Yes." And they offered him a lift to the hall, but Mr. Thomas said, "It's a glorious evening and I need a stretch. It's no more than 3 miles, is it?" And they gave him copious instructions. And so he climbed upon his bike, and the horse and cart did not catch it up before he arrived unexpected at the hall. But the squire, after the initial outburst about guests turning up unexpected, was delighted to see him, and suggested after the journey that Mr. Thomas might want a walk. "We could climb Lakey Hill," he suggested. "We could climb Lakey Hill," he suggested. "A steep climb towards the top, but you'll get a wonderful view of the countryside. Absolutely wonderful from the top. What do you say?" And Mr. Thomas, after washing and changing and brushing and doing what he needed, agreed. And so it was. They were just about to set off when Mr. Thomas turned and said, "I don't suppose you have any binoculars. I would like some. You see, while I'm here and while you're busy, I plan to travel around the country, which I do not know at all, in my bicycle." "Your bicycle? What an infernal contraption. I'd let you have the trap." "No, I like my bicycle." "Well, I don't have any binoculars. I've got a map we can take and I can point things out to you." And the squire rubbed his face and said, "Hang on though. Yes, I do have. There are those binoculars that Baxter made." "Baxter?" "Oh, an old retainer of my father, an amateur archaeologist. He was the person who drew the barrow you noticed when you came in." And it was true, Mr. Thomas had noticed as soon as he had come in a fine, and he thought incredibly accurate picture of a barrow. And the strange thing was, it was not a barrow as it was now, but as it might have been when it was built. "Yes, I was going to ask you about that. That barrow has lots of the latest ideas included in it. Presumably the man had read the relevant papers?" And the squire again rubbed his chin and said, "I don't know about that. I don't think he was a great reader. No, he wasn't a great reader. But he had his own methods. And he had his butler, bring the binoculars. Now, said the squire, there's a trick to opening them, but I'm damned if I can remember it. And he passed the binoculars to Mr. Thomas. Now, they were in a black cube, strange, without any clear way to open it. And Mr. Thomas sat and fiddled, and the squire said, "Oh, I can't help you. I'd never go near them myself. I do not like binoculars." Just then, Mr. Thomas said, "Ow! This infernal Borgia's box! But at least it's open." And it was true, although he was bleeding badly from a cut that had been made by some sort of hidden sharp point. The box was open. And Mr. Thomas took the binoculars around his head, and the pair of them walked up Lakey Hill. "It's remarkable, you know," said Mr. Thomas, going back to his theme. "That man Baxter made these. This is specialist work." "Made and sealed," said the squire, "a few days before he died. He was an amateur archaeologist, as I said. He knew more about the ruins in this place than any man living." "What a good man," said Mr. Thomas. "No. There are many things I would say about Baxter, but I would never call him good," said the squire. "But we're coming to a difficult bit. I am going to stop talking." And it was true. The hill soon became so steep as the sun set that both of them were breathless before they got to the top. But the view was worth it. It was so fine they could see over 7 counties, and afar off the Cambrians. And then Mr. Thomas remembered the binoculars, and he got them out, and he said, "Well, I should be able to see everything I want to from here." And he focused. And he looked towards the south, and he suddenly said, "There's a remarkable church there. It's so fine. I've never seen a like double tower. What's the village over there, mid-distance?" And the squire said, "That's Aldborough. That's Aldborough. And if you are pleased with Aldborough Church, you are easily pleased. It's built in the ruins of old Faulkner Abbey, but the abbey is long gone. I remember Baxter wanted to dig it, but the ecclesiastical authorities wouldn't let him." And Mr. Thomas took down the binoculars and looked. And as he looked, he said, "You're right. I can't see anything without the binoculars but a distant tower that I can barely make out. But with the binoculars, it is so clear." And then he moved his eyes and looked to a hill, and he said, "I know what that hill is called." And the squire said, "Go on then, what is it?" "It's called Gallows Hill. And if you don't want it to be called Gallows Hill, you shouldn't put a gallows on it that cracks the crowds." "Where?" said the squire. "There, at the ball top, at the top of the hill. I can clearly see with the binoculars." "Gallows? There aren't any. It's just a plantation," said the squire. Mr. Thomas brought down the binoculars, and looking out, he could not make out what he had seen so clearly. A clear patch at the top of the hill. It seemed to be all pine, up to the very top. And there was certainly no gallows to be seen. Thinking, he brought up the binoculars again, and he said, "Well, the crowd's dissipated, but there is something hanging on the gallows. No, I blink. No, I must have been mistaken. But there are people there, I'm sure." Well, the squire said, "Well, there aren't. It's a private hunting estate. Mine, as it happens, and I keep it such that the poachers won't want to go in it. I can assure you there's nobody there." And before they had left to come back down to the hall, Mr. Thomas had decided the next day to go off to Oldenbrook Church and see what it was he had seen, and also to the hill. And he asked the squire would it be all right if he left after lunch. "Oh, quite," said the squire. "I can be busy all afternoon, but I'll make sure we have a late supper. Now, put on your finest clothes and let us have dinner." And so they had a dinner that was remarkable in both the quality and the quantity of the gift of the food, for the squire did himself proud. And as he was looking around drinking port, Mr. Thomas suddenly noticed a picture, and he said, "That's Faulkner Abbey. That's what I saw from the top of the hill." And indeed, written on it was Faulkner Abbey, and it was drawn with peculiar exactitude. "Is that really what Oldborough Church looks like?" And the squire said, No, that was drawn by the fantasy of Mr. Baxter, I tell you. It's a fantasy." And Mr. Thomas pulled a face. That night in bed, he dreamt that 1,000 voices were whispering at him, that it had come back from the dark and from the cold. He could never make out a form, but only knew they were multitude. He woke up in the morning shivering, and the first thing that caught his eye was the binoculars that he had taken up to his bedroom, and he determined that he certainly would take them with him. And he agreed that he would go off an afternoon, find his own tea, and come home for supper. And the squire muttered to himself, he didn't trust bicycles, and they'd better have a very late supper planned. And it seemed that the squire's prognostications were quite right. It was lucky it was one of the lightest days in the year, for it was full 9 o'clock before Mr. Thomas came back, carrying with him his bicycle. And the squire said, "My, what happened to you?" And not allowing his guest to go upstairs until the explanation was given, Mr. Thomas replied, "Well, I went to your church, and you're right. Oldborough Church is nothing, and it's built on some ruins, but you can make nothing about them above ground. The tower, I would have thought, was 19th century. Very, very disappointing." And then I had tea at a little cafe there, and then I bicycled to that other hill, the one you called Gallows Hill. It's quite a distance, I think. Full 5 miles. Yes, I thought it took me time. And then I looked for a gate, and I couldn't find one. There isn't one. I told you I don't want people there. So I thought, I'll just go and check. So I pushed my way through the hedge, but as I pushed, I tripped. And my bicycle got caught. I had to drag it out. And I noticed there were lots of punctures on it, and I thought, well, I'll just leave it for the minute. So I left it there by the hedge, and went up through the forest. And my, it's thick. And everywhere there seemed to be voices in my ears. I would look round, and there was nothing. "Must have been the pheasants," said the squire. And then I came right to the top, and I fell full on my face, and I got up, and it felt like somebody had pulled me. And I had the binoculars on me because I had taken them with me just in case I saw something. And the string snapped and they fell down. Well, I picked them up and I strapped them on to my back in my knapsack that I always carry a raincloth in. And then things seemed to be pulling my hair and pulling the knapsack. And I got right to the top, and then something pulled. And I tumbled. And I found myself right by 3 great blocks of stone. I know what they were. But you were right. All around me, there were trees. Well, I ran down the hill, ran as fast as I possibly could. It must have been about 6. And all the while, things were pulling at my hair, and I must have fallen a dozen times. Couldn't get my knapsack with the binoculars in it comfortable. And I picked up my bike, and I threw it over the hedge, and I ran through. And then I set to mending the punctures. 7 I found on the front wheel, and 12 on the back. Now, I am adept at mending punctures, but I had mended the front wheel and was just turning to the back when I noticed the front wheel had again gone flat. So I decided I had to walk. It's a long way, isn't it? Fully 9 miles. All right, let us have supper. Just as well I had we planned a late supper. A quick bath I think you can have, and a punch. And I know Mr. Squires, the butler, wants to talk to you. For he heard that you had the binoculars. It was after a supper that was had quite hurriedly that finally the squire allowed his butler in. And Mr. Thomas repeated his story, at the end of which the butler said, "But you didn't go in the middle of those 3 stones, did you?" "No." "And did you have the binoculars with you?" "Yes." "Well, let's have a look." Carefully, gingerly, Mr. Thomas pulled out the binoculars. But the lenses were broken, and a black goo was dripping out. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll replace them." "You've broken them." "Oh, no." The butler. "I don't think it was him. Do you remember I used to live, when I was a footman, next to Baxter?" "Yes." "He was a funny man, that Baxter. He would go out late at night and come back with a basket. And he was always boiling things in a still. I remember one time a doctor told me that he'd been ill, that something in the still had escaped, he said, as if it was a caged animal, and his entire leg was ulcerated. Well, the doctor came in, Dr. Gilbert it was, and he dressed the legs, and he looked around Baxter's stuff, and there was a mask there. And he was going to put it on when Baxter, with a sudden cry, said, "Don't! Unless you wanted to look with dead men's eyes." And Dr. Gilbert pressed the mask, and he realised it was a skull. Well, Baxter took a long time making those binoculars. I remember he used to tell me about them and said when he had made them, when they were made and sealed, people would have to charge him to look through. And I said to him, "Well, why aren't you making them? You'll make a fine job of them." And he looked and he said, "Because brewing it takes time." And I well remember when he was brewing. I'm not sure what it was. A foul smell, a stench would go between our houses. Ugh, revolting. And then there came a day, midsummer, 10 years ago. He declared them done and said he was off to use them for the first time. And it would be remarkable what he would see. I remember he did the drawing of Faulkner Abbey that week. But it was at the end of the week, when I was woken up by a great cry. Now, I was tired and ignored it the first time. But there was a second, louder cry, and this time seemed to be mingled with other voices. So I looked out, and there was Mr. Baxter. He was walking down the street, but he didn't look like he was walking by his will, for something was moving his legs, bit by bit by bit, and I called out to him just as he lost his hat and said, "Baxter, what is happening?" And a voice, well, Baxter's, a voice whispered in me, "It's none of your business. You go back to sleep, my man. None of your business." And Baxter seemed to be involuntarily, jerkily moving down the street, and his hat, which had fallen off, was back on his head, but I could have sworn he never bent to collect it. Well, he disappeared, and nobody saw him for a week. Only noticed the ravens were gathering on Gallows Hill. And we all went up, and there he was, lying in those 3 stones, his neck broken, as if he had been hung. Well, and I acquired most of his property, apart from Dr. Gilbert, who had the still and couldn't get anything out of it, and I gave away most of what he had to the museum. But I kept the binoculars. And I know what he was doing with them, said Mr. Squires, the butler. Sealed, huh? I reckon he was up there amongst the bones. For they left them, to rot in olden days, there on the gallows. And he was taking their skull, so that he could see with dead men's eyes. Now what do we do with these? And he pointed to the binoculars. And Mr. Thomas said, "Well, I think we will have to bury them in the churchyard. I don't think there's any other way we can do this." And the next day, the squire had the vicar read the full service over them. And at the end, The squire turned and said, "It's a pity we never got to use them properly, though, isn't it? I mean, I wouldn't, but a man like you could have really got something out of them." And Alan rubbed his chin and said, "Well, I don't know. I think Mr. Baxter got a lot out of it. May I look at his notebooks, please?" And the rest of the trip Mr. Allen passed in glee, looking at the notebooks of Baxter in that last week, at all the tumuli and all the churches that he discovered. But I'm afraid when he left, such was the fear the county left him, in spite of his great trip, when he remembered it when he was back in his college, he never went back again. Never.